You are listening to a podcast created by the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education. Our mission is to help you understand your world better through geography. This podcast addresses the Minnesota Geography Standards for Grade 4, Standard 3, Code 43121, and 43112, which deal with using latitude and longitude on maps, and also Grade 8, Code 83121, which deals with using appropriate geographic tools to analyze and explain the distribution of physical and human characteristics of place. The content of this podcast is about the geographic skill of using latitude and longitude. Some file format versions of this podcast includes supporting visuals. Also, the grid involved in this exercise may be printed out for use by classroom teachers by clicking on Support Materials near the link on the web page where you started this podcast. Our presenter is Nathan Klatt, a geography teacher from Buffalo Communities Middle School in Buffalo, Minnesota. I am MAGE member Fred Kunze.
Longitude, latitude, longitude, do you know what longitude, latitude means?
So this is a review activity that I use with 8th grade geography students after we spend some time learning about latitude and longitude. And so this is kind of a review activity based off of the game Battleship. And it's basically using a game board of your design to play Battleship, but rather than using just a standard grid, you use latitude and longitude. And the objective is to destroy your opponent while learning how to use the geographic grid of latitude and longitude. So you basically have a standard sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11, and you have two grids, and the grids go from the equator, 40 north and 40 south, and from the prime meridian, 40 east and 40 west, and then you have the matching grid right next to it. And on one of those grids you place your ships, submarines, carriers, PT boats, and battleships. And on grid 2 you keep track of your firing on your opponent, your hits and your misses. Just like with the actual game of Battleship, the ships themselves all take up more or less space depending upon what type of ship they are. And you basically just circle the intersecting latitude and longitude lines to take up that space. So a submarine would be a single intersection or latitude and longitude coordinate, whereas a battleship would be 4 of them. Each student needs to have their own set of grids, both grids, in front of them to play. And how I designed the game board itself is I take a set of manila folders, just regular file folders, and use the center tab folders and place them back to back and staple them in that center tab, and then lay them flat on a table with the center tab standing upright and kind of pull the folders apart slightly, and then you essentially have your game board, and then you just lay the 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with the 2 grids on it in place in the file folders, and set the students across from one another and tell them to set up their ships. And I usually have the kids place 5 submarines, 4 PT boats, 3 carriers, and 2 battleships. And again, the size that they take up on the grid is all based on the size of the ship. So submarines is a single intersection, so they just put a small circle around an intersecting grid line. PT boats are 2, so they make a circle around 2 intersecting grid lines. Carriers are 3, and then battleships are 4. So battleships essentially look like large boxes on the grid. And they get their ships planted, and then they decide to open fire. And I stress with them that they have to state their latitude coordinates first and their longitude coordinates second. And you'll need to kind of monitor this and circle around the room to make sure that they do it. And The game itself can take an entire class period. You could play for 15 minutes. I found that if left to do it with that many ships and that size grid, it will easily take up an entire hour. Of course, victory can be defined by the first person to sink their opponent's ships, or if there isn't time, the number of hits or the total number of ships sunk plus the number of hits, and then I kind of award a small prize accordingly. I use this primarily as a review activity. Kids find it a lot of fun, and I find that they get in the habit, especially of always stating latitude first and then longitude, and really they're very focused on the grid and very focused on finding the right coordinates so that they can find success and figure out where their opponent's ships are, and to try to destroy them first.
You have been listening to a production of the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education. Background music is courtesy of Jim Hogue of Decorah, Iowa. The Minnesota Alliance is a non-profit group of educators and other parties who are interested in promoting an enhanced understanding of our world through improved geographic literacy.